The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Rushcliffe again, everybody. We've got 4 left to go. There are 2 big ones, there's 1 medium-sized one, and there's a tiny one. And this is the first of the big ones. This one, it will take me probably about 2 hours to walk around. I've been looking forward to this one actually because it's got lots to see and lots to talk about, loads of history. It's called Radcliffe on Trent. Radcliffe on Trent, Radcliffe on the flooding river. We have 4 left in Rushcliffe, 2 big, 1 medium-sized and the other tiny. This is the first of the biggies, Radcliffe on Trent. I didn't know a lot about Radcliffe before coming here, but it is familiar to me. I remember driving through this village several times during my 20s when I used to head into Nottingham for gigs in the city centre. Radcliffe has a population of just over 8,000, making it one of the largest villages in Nottinghamshire. Although it's close to Nottingham, it's not considered part of the Greater Nottingham built-up area. It lies on the southern bank of the Trent and takes its name from the cliff overlooking the river below. The Rad part of its name is a corruption of the Old English word for red, in reference to the colour of the cliffs. They're formed of Triassic red shale with gypsum banding. Radcliffe on Trent parish used to contain Upper Saxondale, but as we know, that's now its own parish. Well, supposedly. See the Saxondale episode for that one. It does contain the hamlet of Harlequin, however, a small, mainly residential area just off the A52. As you'd expect from a village this size, it's got practically everything. One thing it's not short of would be pubs. There are 4 here, and there used to be more. It also has 3 churches and a number of community spaces, such as Rockley Memorial Park, which has an interesting backstory. Former Nottinghamshire and England cricket captain George Parr was born and died in this village. Let's discover more about him and Radcliffe on Trent in general. We start at Radcliffe railway station, which lies on the Nottingham to Grantham line. We already know a lot about this line, so there's no need to go into great detail about it. The Great Northern and London and North Western Joint Railway opened in 1879 from Saxondale Junction, a few miles east of the station. We discussed that in Bingham. It's the same line that provided the Nottingham to Northampton service, which ceased in 1953. The station itself was opened by the Great Northern Railway, and the buildings were designed by, well, who else? Thomas Chambers Hine. Services at Radcliffe are today provided by East Midlands Railway, mostly using Class 158s or Class 170s. There are 5 trains each day to Nottingham and 4 to Skegness, with a single late evening service that terminates at Boston. Until 1851, the River Trent was the main means of transportation for heavy goods between Nottingham and Radcliffe, and not the railway. By 1881, only one household, the Upton family, were involved with river traffic, operating a ferry across the Trent. The railway attracted a number of wealthy businessmen, and the area near the station saw a building boom in the 1870s. Visitors to the village increased too, but the level of crime rose with that. The increasing number of drunk and disorderly cases in particular was making it impossible for the police to cope. This led to the construction of Radcliffe's police station with its attached lockup. Now we're in the village centre and we're about to pass the library. It's worth noting that within the library are many publications from the Radcliffe on Trent Local History Society. The society has been supporting local historians and writers since 1984. A lot of their work has been reproduced online, and I've taken advantage of that. Thanks guys! Here we have the Catholic Church. There have been Catholics in Radcliffe for hundreds of years. The current church was dedicated in 1962, but the site was originally intended to be a parish hall. The building has been altered and extended over the years and now includes a meeting room, catering facilities and extra seating. Radcliffe has had a few sites that were dedicated to Catholicism. In 1938, a mass centre was opened at the Lodge at Wharf End. In 1940, a corrugated iron building was purchased in Shelford Road and dedicated to the English martyrs. Sunday Mass was held there monthly until 1948, when it was held then weekly in a chapel. The history of Methodism in Radcliffe-on-Trent is a little more involved. The first Wesleyan meetings were held before 1791 in Baker Beeson's house on Mount Pleasant, and their first chapel was built on an adjoining site in 1796. Other branches of Methodism, like the Primitives for example, were also established in Radcliffe during the early 19th century. In 1817, John Benton was the first missionary to visit the village, preaching to men and young people in Shelford Road. The Wesleyan chapel was eventually demolished and services were then held in the Primitive Chapel on Shelford Road, and today that premises remains as the only Methodist chapel in the village today. Well, so far so good. It's fairly dark at the moment with this cloud cover. I haven't got a lot of daylight left today. It's about 2:30, so it starts getting dark around 4 o'clock in November. So I've got about an hour and a bit of daylight left, so hopefully I'll get round all of this route in time, fingers crossed. Better get my skates on. There's still plenty to see here in Radcliffe-on-Trent. We're now going to turn left at the co-op over there to continue along the main street. Now, Radcliffe has lots of pubs. Here's the first, the Royal Oak. This has had multiple names, including the Newcastle Arms, the Duke's Arms, and the Plough, but it became known as the Royal Oak in 1832. The earliest record of the property is from 1780, when Elizabeth Marshall, a Radcliffe spinster, sold it to Anne Richardson. It appears that the site was repeatedly bought, mortgaged, and sublet by speculators, both from the village and from Nottingham. There were originally 2 rooms on each floor. Close by were 2 breweries, tenements and small shops. Attached to the pub was a brewhouse, a corner shop, a butcher's and a slaughterhouse. The Royal Oak is considered a pillar of the local community. It hosts events such as monthly village markets, live music and pub quizzes. In 2022, the Royal Oak was shortlisted for Business of the Year at the celebrating Rushcliffe Awards. There are more current pubs to see yet, but Radcliffe used to have a lot more. This here is a former pub which is now a Tesco supermarket. It was the Black Lion, which was permanently closed on October 24, 2014. It became a branch of Tesco a year later. The original Black Lion pub was located across the road from the current building, and a bracket remains on that building where the old pub sign used to hang. It moved over the road in 1928 onto the site of Buxton's Farm and the Old Village Pinfold. Other former pubs in Radcliffe include the Nag's Head, which is now a private house. Now, if you continue walking up Crotwell Road, you eventually think you're heading off into the middle of nowhere. It runs to the A52. There are landmarks off this, and when I say off this, I mean off this. I'm talking about 2 schools. There's one on either side of the road. Let's check out Radcliffe-on-Trent Junior School first, which is on this side, the right-hand side. Now, very little is known about the early provision of education in Radcliffe, but it has a secondary and a bunch of primaries today, including Radcliffe-on-Trent Junior School, which is where we are now. School history can be traced back to at least 1811 here through dame schools. They would have been the only opportunity for learning for many of the village children back then. They were usually run by one woman who was more of a childminder than a trained teacher. Between the 1840s and 1860s, there was a school on the corner of Walnut Grove and Main Road run by Samuel Helmsley. By 1871, it was called Vernon House School, and in 1899 it moved to Beaconsfield House on Bingham Road, where it continued until at least 1908. The secondary school is South Nottinghamshire Academy, and it's got an interesting past that includes several previous names and a partnership with South Nottingham College. The original name of the school was Radcliffe-on-Trent Secondary Modern, but it later became Danecourt Comprehensive and then Danecourt School. When this school first opened back in 1957, it had a certain Canadian feel to it. That was apt, as one of the driving motivations for the development of the school was the presence of a sizable Canadian expat population in the district. It was a product of the Royal Canadian Air Force's use of Langer Airfield. Of the initial intake, roughly 20% were Canadians. Now, Radcliffe loves sport, and that much will become quite obvious as we walk around. Here's the Bowls Club, whose first meeting was held on April the 8th, 1929 in St Mary's Parish Room. The club is located on the site of two former tennis courts, and the original pavilion was a wooden hut with shutters for ventilation and light. It was replaced by a brick building in 1969. Okay, we're now on the A52, the very noisy A52. And I ummed and ahed about this section of the route for a long time when I was planning it, because we've got to follow this for a fair distance, because there's no way to get into the housing estate, which is currently behind the camera, via a footpath or any other means that's legal anyway. So I've got to follow this virtually to the other end of the village before we then turn right and go around the area near the church. So yeah, I'll see you there in a few minutes' time. The cemetery now. This has 16 graves of Commonwealth soldiers who died in World War I. Some of those are scattered around the cemetery, whilst others are located at the farthest end, dedicated to patients who died at the Nottinghamshire County War Hospital. The cemetery also commemorates servicemen who died in World War II as well. The cemetery exists because the churchyard around St Mary's is full. It had been used for burial since the 16th century, after all. The earliest surviving stone there is for John Green, who died in 1698, and the latest is for Edward Brewster, who died in 1870. Located in the centre of the village are the Grange and Grange Hall, wonderful community venues managed by Radcliffe-on-Trent Parish Council. Between them, they are ideal for every occasion, including meetings, wedding celebrations, dances, theatre productions, and a host of other social functions. The rooms in both buildings are on one level, and except for the stage in the main hall, they do not present any steps. There's a blue plaque on the wall of the Grange. It's a bit difficult to read because it's quite high up, but it tells you about Hilda Mary Dowson, who lived from 1883 to 1956. Hilda was a leading local suffragist, secretary of the Nottingham branch National Union Women's Suffrage Societies, and lived at the Grange between 1924 and 1956. So to the church, and there's one question that lots of people wonder about this building. Did its steeple fall down in 1792, or is it just an urban myth? For many years, everyone thought it had fallen until doubts were raised in 1907 by a local historian, J.T. Godfrey. He produced an engraving dated 1795 depicting the church with its steeple intact. That picture used to be displayed within this very church. The true answer lies in vicars' complaints about the lack of funds for church repairs, church wardens' accounts, and newspaper reports. The accounts tell a sorry story. Expenditure on repairs was ever increasing, and how much money was spent on the steeple is unknown. By 1748, concerns about the steeple were mounting, and a stonecutter from Gedling, Thomas Cottingham, was employed to strengthen it. However, in 1767, during a violent storm, part of the spire collapsed, killing a jackdaw and a frog. Soon after, the eminent Nottingham builder Samuel Stretton was brought in to give advice. After the quaffing of much ale in the village pubs, hasty repairs followed. The steeple remained in a dangerous condition, and in 1791 a decision was made to take the spire down. This resulted in the tower being raised by 2 yards. The following February, an earth tremor was felt throughout the Trent Valley, and heavy rains fell in the summer, perhaps further undermining the building's structure. On November the 21st, 1792, the steeple did indeed come down, crashing through the roof. So what about the engraving then? Well, it was soon revealed that it wasn't of this church after all. Instead, it was an illustration of a different church, the one at Radcliffe on the Reek. The church building we see today developed in several stages, heralded by the dramatic fall of the steeple. At some point, the old stone pillars with their capitals were replaced by cast iron. The next stage occurred over 60 years later, when Earl Manvers authorised its rebuilding. It was completed in 1858 in the early English style using Bulwell stone, with blue stone bands around the building and over the arches. The final transformation took place following a vestry meeting in 1874, when it was decided a larger building was needed to cope with the rapidly increasing number of houses and inhabitants. Named after the local landowning family, the Manvers Arms was built in the late 18th century and was originally known as the White Hart. It was a significant inn where coaches would stop regularly. It's been a focal point for the community for a long time, hosting meetings and auctions from the 19th century onwards. It was also the site of a party in 1843 to celebrate the passing of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The pub has also served as a court of assizes and a mortuary, and because of that fact, it's rumoured to be haunted. The Bell family ran the pub for several years. Samuel Bell was married to Catherine, sister of the famous Nottinghamshire and All England cricketer George Parr. The Parrs lived next door at the Manor House. Next up, we have another pub called the Chestnut. It's a pleasant and popular cask beer-led village pub with a smart 1920s style decor. Originally it was called the Cliff Inn, but following a major refurbishment in 2006, it became the Horse Chestnut, and later in 2015 it was simply renamed to the Chestnut instead. Like the other public houses, the Cliff Inn was used for inquests. One such inquest held there was into the death of Henry Wright Morley in 1880, after he was killed on the railway line and identified by Frederick Summers. Next door was Collier's Tea Rooms. It was a tall house with large square bay windows. Many walkers and cyclists were supplied with refreshments there, but it was demolished in 1971 and now forms part of the pub's car park. You can probably tell from the lights outside the Chestnut there that the light is starting to fade. I haven't got all that much left to do, to be honest with you. I've got a sports area to see, there's the Cliff Walk alongside the River Trent, there's Rockley Memorial Park and the Radcliffe pub, plus an extra bit of driving at the end. Do you think we're going to make it, or are we going to finish in the dark? Let's see. Wharf Lane Recreation Ground opened in 1897. The area was a popular meeting place for young people at the turn of the century, even though the proximity of the River Trent was a danger to swimmers. Wharf Lane gets its name thanks to an actual wharf on the river that was built in 1779 by the Trent Navigation Company. That was a time when river trade was king and the railways were yet to arrive. The recreation ground is the home of Radcliffe Olympic Football Club. Founded in 1876, the club spent the vast majority of their early history in local leagues, such as the Notts Alliance, Notts Realm League and Central Midlands Alliance. Radcliffe Olympic have only enjoyed 2 FA Cup campaigns, but their debut season in 2010-11 was a notable one. They beat Holbeach United, Wisbech Town, Winsterton Rangers and Oadby Town before being drawn against Tipton Town in the 3rd qualifying round. The club have won various League Cups in the past, and on the football theme, Radcliffe can boast a famous local resident, former Nottingham Forest midfielder Ian Wone. This next section sees us traverse the cliffs that overlook the Trent via Cliff Walk. Radcliffe has always had a wild woodland area with cliffs leading down to the river, but initially there were no rights of way across them or any public spaces for people to enjoy. The cliffs were owned by Earl Manvers until he sold much of his land to the Collick estates and private landowners in the early 1920s. Soon after that sale, the cliffs gained not only this walk, but also a public park, and that brings us to Rockley, or at least it will in a minute. So for the majority of the route along the cliff walk, the Trent is there, but it's kind of obscured by trees and whatnot. You can just about see it through the trees there. And so I just realised something as I was walking up here. This is far from the last time we'll ever see the Trent on the channel, but this is the last time we'll see the Trent in Nottinghamshire. This memorial park was donated to Radcliffe in 1927 by a man named Lyle Rockley in remembrance of his son and some other local servicemen who lost their lives in World War I. Covering a large area, it includes a formal park, the Cliff Walk, some woodlands and access to the River Trent. Lyle Rockley was born in 1859 and was the son of the master carpenter William Rockley and his wife Letitia. He founded Rockley's Limited in 1898 through the acquisition and amalgamation of 5 East Midlands companies. The company flourished in the early 1900s, changing the appearance of city streets in the East Midlands with its striking posters. Lyle Rockley was chairman of the company for 30 years. During his career, he was a member of the British Poster Advertising Association and their president 3 times. Work on this park began in 1926 after the parish council accepted Rockley's proposal. At first, 2 small parks above the cliffs were constructed. One was designated a rest park where people could sit without being disturbed by games, and the other was a pleasure park with flower beds, seats and a small pavilion for refuge in wet weather. A mile-long grass promenade was then laid out on top of the cliffs, and that's what would become the Cliff Walk. The opening ceremony took place on the 15th of October 1927, marking the 10th anniversary of the day Rockley received word via telegram that his son William had been killed in World War I. The last pub on our walk is the Radcliffe, located within Northholme House, number 64 Shelford Road. This was built in 1908 by Charles Wright Gothorpe. He was a former athlete, being a championship holder in the 120-yard hurdles. He was also a member of the Nottingham Boat Club, of which he later became president, and he played football for Nottingham Forest when they were purely an amateur 11. Some might say that's still the case. In any event, Northholme House was just that, a house. That was until 1952, when Home Brewery submitted an application to remove the licence of the Old Red Lion on Water Lane to Northholme House on Shelford Road. This was done to give a better distribution of licensed premises in the village. By this time, there was a considerable area of development in this part of Radcliffe. For a time, the Radcliffe was run by another former footballer, Russ Allen, who played for Arsenal, West Bromwich Albion and Mansfield Town. His last connection with football had been as manager of Heanor Town. Okay, we've just about made it around the route in the daylight. Yay, that's a good thing. But I can't promise this last bit will be in the daylight though. After walking down Shelford Road and back to the railway station where we began, I'm going to hop in the car and do a bit of driving to finish this episode off. We've still got to check out Bingham Road playing fields, a little settlement called Harlequin, which falls within Radcliffe's boundaries, the cricket club and the golf club, which are both on the A52. After passing Bingham Road playing fields on the left, we're now heading eastwards out of Radcliffe. As you can tell by now, the light was getting far too difficult to work with, but I still managed to capture Harlequin, a small hamlet on the other side of the A52. Until the start of the 20th century, there were several plant nurseries within Harlequin, which could account for its name. One theory says visitors to nearby Belvoir Castle saw the banked colours of glass houses and nursery flowers and likened them to patterns of a Harlequin costume. 2 brickworks existed in the area until 1940, along with several clay pits providing material. It contained very little in the way of residential housing though, until after 1940, when much of the nursery land was sold off. Harlequin was notably once home to the Nottingham lace entrepreneur George Mather. To finish with, I opted to use pictures for the golf club and cricket club because by now seeing anything of note would have been a struggle. This time of year is really unforgiving sometimes, isn't it? Radcliffe-on-Trent Golf Club was founded in 1909 by Tom Williamson, a local golf professional. The original course had just 9 holes. The first round ever to be played on this course was an exhibition match between Williamson and Harry Varden. Varden won the match and kept the trophy, which the club later reacquired for its centenary in 2009. In 1925, the club expanded to 18 holes after purchasing land from the Manvers estate. In 1972, the club remodelled the course again with the help of architect Frank Pennick. Pennick added new holes and modified others. The original clubhouse was demolished in 1986. Today, the club hosts the McGregor Trophy, which is the alternative name for the English Boys Under-16 Championship. The tournament was originally held in 1982 and was later adopted by the English Golf Union. And to finish, we have the cricket club just up the A52 right on the parish boundary. Cricket was first played in Radcliffe in 1801 on a pitch on Home Lane, but only by the local elite. As we know, George Parr was a notable local cricketer, but so too was Richard Daft. Lots of village locals liked a game of cricket. One such man, John, was the captain of the club for 20 years, and he lived at the Royal Oak in 1911. He also played for the local football club. Currently, Radcliffe-on-Trent Cricket Club has 3 Saturday teams, a social team, a development team on Sundays, and lots of successful junior age group teams. And that's it for Radcliffe. 1 big one down and 1 more to go. Tomorrow we're off to that medium-sized one, and we'll be talking a lot about aviation. Nottingham isn't very well known for its connections with airports. There is of course East Midlands Airport near the M1, but how many of you know its other one? We'll find out tomorrow. See you soon. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.